want to read is something that statement the Wiyot tribe has put out. It's entitled, "Do you live in traditional Wiyot territory?" So bear with me as I read this, because I'm not a big fan of also reading my phone, but it is important to acknowledge them around. So Wiyot people have lived in the Humboldt Bay region for thousands of years. The map to the right shows the traditional territory. Wiyot people live in permanent villages along the waterways, which also serve as travel and trade routes. Seasonal camps were made on the prairies. Mountainous regions provided berries, acorns, pine nuts, wild game, and vascular materials. Wiyot people actively managed the resources, burning for open grasslands, cultivating edible bulbs, and following strict hunting and fishing protocols. So, what is the honor tax? The honor tax is a way of recognizing and respecting the sovereignty of Native nations and implementing the United Nations Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples. This is a quote-unquote tax out of respect for Native sovereignty. Rather than a gift or a donation, we all live on traditional Native homelands. If you do not live in the Wiyot territory, you can initiate an honor tax in your community. The honor tax is not in any way initiated by the Wiyot Nation, although they have formally agreed via their tribal council to accept the honor tax. The honor tax was initiated by individuals, organizations, businesses who want to actively recognize the sovereignty of the Wiyot tribe and the right to their traditional land. The honor tax is a voluntary annual tax paid directly to the Wiyot Nation by people who are on their traditional territories. The amount is decided by you, the individual. And I'm about to give you two foundations that you can look up. And the first one is the 7th Generation Fund for Indian Development. And the second one is Democracy Unlimited for Humboldt County. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, God.
Good evening and welcome to Dr. Butch Ware's People Power Assembly. It is with great honor that we have been invited today to introduce Dr. Ware to you here in Houdini on unceded Wiyot land. My name is Jahan, and I'm a lifelong local to Humboldt County, a community organizer, mother, and I'm here representing Humboldt for Palestine tonight.
I'm a substitute teacher, a racial equity facilitator, and I'm the poet laureate of the Arcata. We also want to take a moment to welcome our revolutionary ancestors into this space, acknowledging that it is on their shoulders and with their guidance that we continue the fight that we are fighting every day and all the time. So please just take a second to acknowledge an ancestor.
Dr. Butch Ware comes from humble beginnings and holds a PhD in history from University of Pennsylvania. My screen keeps jumping. I also hate reading off my phone. And I apologize. Well, I think maybe because we're in the same document at the same time. I don't know what's going on. I'm so sorry, guys. We can share it. Oh, sharing is caring. Thank you. Holds a PhD in history from University of Pennsylvania and currently works as a professor for the University of California, Santa Barbara. Many folks got to know Dr. Ware from his online presence and advocacy in the Palestinian liberation movement and across anti-imperialist movements worldwide. As a brilliant and sensible voice for change, he was selected as the Green Party's vice presidential candidate for the 2024 presidential election. Dr. Ware has helped to spark and shape a new generation of activists and grassroots organizers, leading study groups, book clubs, and teach-ins rooted in the teachings of our revolutionary ancestors that challenge imperialism, militarism, and white supremacy.
y'all know, as students, as rural community members, activists, organizers, voters, and future voters, who have been disenfranchised by people who are supposed to fight for us, we know that we are skeptical of politicians right now. Real skeptical. There are glaring and spot-on critiques of the Democrats, of the Republicans, and of the Green Party. We are all ready for something different. Dr. Ware is aware of this palpable energy and seeks to, quote, build infrastructure inside community and, quote, set a new pace so that energy that we have in this county has somewhere to go. This is one of the reasons he's choosing to travel to Humboldt and to places like Humboldt, because there's energy here building momentum to change things. As we face unprecedented daily experiences on top of imminent political and cultural revolutions, Dr. Butch Ware sees himself as someone who can help steward the stolen power of a dying empire back into the hands of the people. Not just for us to recreate failed systems all over again, but for us to put in the work it takes to maintain solidarity with one another so that we all can thrive.
As people who care deeply about intersectional liberation from Gaza to Houdini, we are at a pivotal moment in time where we must work together urgently to address the needs of the most vulnerable among us. Dr. Ware's rejection of billionaire funding and super PAC money, while creating a financial hurdle to overcome with people power, helps to ensure that both his speech and his policy are guided by education, integrity, and the good of the people. Running on a platform of housing first, healthcare as a human right, and homelessness as a policy failure, Dr. Ware has a plan to address some of the most urgent issues for Californians and return California's wealth to the hands of the people so that we can all thrive. Because Dr. Ware comes from a deep understanding of history and anti-imperialist movements, we see him carry on the long tradition of revolutionary organizers like the Black Panthers, who understood the need for true solidarity that exists only beyond identity, ideology, and colonial borders.
There's a theme. The theme is solidarity towards thriving, so we don't recreate this bullshit all over again. Yeah. The theme is solidarity towards thriving, so when we tear this shit down, we don't build it back up the way it is. Yeah. The first step to that, did you get the theme? I just want to make sure you guys are okay. Just checking. The first step is believing. Believing that a better world is possible from Turtle Island to Palestine. Believing in a prosperous and liberated future for Palestinians and Californians alike, and all people living in the grip of American imperialism. Believing in our power to not just destroy the systems that oppress us, but to build something new and beautiful in its wake. So today, amongst pain and despair in the news cycle, amongst paintings of lynchings in Eureka, amongst criminalization of the houseless, amongst kidnapping of our community members, and the erasure of Palestinians, the genocide of Palestinians. Amongst all that, we are here today. We are here today to continue to light the spark. Because it's lit. It's lit. We hope that in your hearts tonight, you hear something that gets you to take a new action, to be kinder to someone else in your neighborhood, to give yourself a chance to do something new. And in honor of that, we want to invite Dr. Butch Ware to the stage.
Assalamu alaikum, peace and power, warmest greetings to one and all. I was getting real comfortable listening to that vibe that y'all said. So can we get a round of applause, please? On unceded land that will never be ceded. And the aim of this political enterprise in which we are collectively engaged is land back. It is reparations. It is restorative justice. I have unfinished business with that flag. And we are here gathered to build community power for collective liberation. A kind of liberation that is, up to this moment, unprecedented, but which is nonetheless written. And that's where I'm going to start my prepared comments. I'm going to start by speaking a truth that comes from my own personal faith tradition, and then I'm going to speak the universal iteration of it. But in order for that truth to land, I need to tell a little bit about myself first. So the first thing to say is that when I was 15 years old, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and it changed my life. Raise your hand if you've read that book. Raise your hand if you're about to go read that book. Good. Raise your hand if you've seen the Spike Lee rendition. Do not watch the movie before you read the book. It will prejudice your read of the book. Read the book and then go watch the movie. They're both great. But I digress. I was 15 years old when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I read that book cover to cover, and one night I could not put that book down. And part of the reason why that book spoke to inner recesses of my soul is that Malcolm was brutally honest about what white supremacy had done to him and what he had done because of what it had made him. He was brutally honest about his father being murdered by white supremacists, laid down on the railroad tracks, his mother being driven to madness because of the state's inability to respond to the crushing poverty and the loss of her husband. Malcolm in foster care, becoming a hustler. And I could relate to those things because I had known many of those same dark places. My father was a locksmith with a 6th grade education who hustled to make ends meet. God rest his soul. And my mother was 15 years old, pregnant with me, told by her high school guidance counselor to abort the child because she was pregnant by a black man in 1973. Her high school guidance counselor told her that if she had the baby, she would be strung out on heroin and turning tricks by the time she was 17. See, white supremacy was trying to take me out before I even got here. And I didn't have the benefit of living at the same street address for a calendar year until I turned 9. It was public housing, evictions, couch surfing, not the cool kind that you do in your 20s, the kind where you ain't got no place else to sleep except on a relative's couch. Sometimes in my dad's locksmith van, sometimes at the battered women's shelter, because just like the police put hands on my father put hands on my mother. A lot of those places that Malcolm described, I knew those dark places intimately. And I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book. Because what Malcolm had at the end of that book was complete and total liberation, not just from his external oppressors, but from his internal oppressors as well, from his inner demons, from the trauma that white supremacy and empire had inscribed on his very soul. And our sisters alluded to us that part of our problem is that we don't believe because we are still colonized in our consciousness. We believe that the empire is a juggernaut, unbeatable. But that's where what Malcolm had at the end of that book came into my story. Because I wanted what Malcolm had at the end of that book. I rushed out, having been up the entire night, and I went to my public school library and I checked it out, an English translation of the Quran. And I read that book cover to cover the next night, and I've been up for 2 straight nights without sleeping. And I fell asleep, and I missed my school bus. I slept all the way through school until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And when my mom got home from work, I said, "Mom, I'm Muslim. And I need you to give me a ride to a mosque." I was 15, you gotta remember. I need you to give me a ride to a mosque so I can take my shahada. I entered into Islam before the week was out. She said, "It's fine, baby, but don't have to wait till the weekend because I got work." And I understood that. And that was my introduction into my own personal faith tradition, but it was also my introduction into the Black radical tradition. The organizing principles that I'm going to speak to in the second half of this talk are drawn from that, but first I want something to land from that sacred tradition, because something happened when I read Malcolm's personal narrative about struggling to overcome oppression and evil. And then I read this sacred text that told of all of these anti-imperialist heroes. Abraham standing against Nimrod of Babylon, 10 toes down against the most vicious imperialist tyrant on the face of the earth in his time. Moses doing likewise. John and Jesus doing the same in front of Rome. Daring to speak a word of truth before an unjust tyrant. And a single truth crystallized that I realized over the years is expressed in 1,000 different tongues and 1,000 different idioms, but it is in every last one of our sacred and secular traditions, and it can be summarized in 3 simple words: all empires fall. All empires fall. 0 exceptions. The Quran frames it in a particular way. End of Surah Maryam, one of my favorite chapters, a warning. Have you wandered in the lands and seen the remains of those who were more exalted in power and might than you are? Do you see any sight of them or hear from them so much as a peep? God be talking tall in the Quran, I'm not gonna lie. Because they're gone. Where is Pharaoh? Where is Caesar? Where is Nimrod? All empires fall. And once you understand that empire is doomed because anything that is taken by force cannot be held, then the thing that you begin to preoccupy yourself with is, what shall we build upon its ashes? Shall we build another empire? No. So that means we must begin the practice of liberation inside our revolution. It cannot be added on Freedom Day. It will be too late. It has to be part of our practice and our praxis and our principles. And if we pray in people, it's got to be part of our prayers too, all through the process. A process of fostering revolutionary love and solidarity. To take a bar from the late, great Fred Hampton, we don't believe you fight fire with fire best. We believe you fight fire with water best. We ain't gonna fight racism with racism. We're gonna fight racism with solidarity. See, Team Blue and Team Red have to play this game of divide and conquer that they have been on since Roman times. And we have to play a politics of power that is about collective liberation and solidarity. We cannot play by these imperialist rules. And we have to be thinking infinitely more about what we are going to construct than on what we are going to tear down. I lived for years in West Africa. I'm a historian of Africa and of revolutionary movements by training. I speak the Wolof language fluently. Sometimes I talk in my sleep in Wolof. And in Wolof they say, the child of Adam never releases what their hand is holding until they're reaching for something better. People will literally hold on to a thing that cuts them, and that is exactly what is taking place in our current political environment. People are holding on to traumatic political institutions because we have not articulated that which we offer, that which is better, that which is beyond empire. That which is about the fulfillment, not just of basic needs, but of the maximization of human potential. And that's where tonight's talk will end in about 26 minutes, if I can keep the clock moving. all empires fall. See, y'all think that you can't win, but I know that freedom is already written. 5 centuries of white supremacist empire, Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, French, British, American. It's more than enough. We are witnessing the extinction burst of American empire, so we need to be prepared for what we will construct upon its ashes. And in order to do that, we must take a clear-eyed assessment of where we actually are in this moment. That Quran, which I mentioned before, alternates glad tidings with warnings. Warnings so that you never get too complacent. Glad tidings so that you never slip into despair. A balanced document to try to keep you in a clear-eyed assessment of how dark the situation you're in actually is, but to realize that you have the capacity for inner change and therefore for outer change. But before we get to the glad tidings, we have to take a clear assessment of the darkness. I landed in town and met with some beautiful folks that have been doing pro-Palestine organizing literally just off of Providence. I got lost downtown and somebody said, "Butch!" And I was like, worried it was a Charlie Kirk moment for a minute. I just let it down, but you know, and may God give us good health and long life. In that moment, I learned when I sat down to lunch with Shannon and Trish and some other beautiful folks that have been doing pro-Palestine organizing, I learned that quite literally here in Eureka, they were painting over lynching threats. Understand that we are tumbling into another nadir in American oppression. We are entering a dark age in the history of American injustice that mirrors what happened after Reconstruction. That's where we are. And it's going to get darker before it gets bright again. Steel yourselves. And I mean that literally. Get you some steel and arm yourselves. That's another part of that black self-defense tradition. Stay strapped. Do I have to say this any more clear? Because understand that just as resistance to occupation is not just a right, it is a moral responsibility. So too is the defense of community. And it is never violence when you are protecting your community against violence. Malcolm said we don't call that violence. We call that common sense. Understand that an unfettered iteration of white supremacy has again been unleashed. But don't think for a second that Team Red is responsible solely for unleashing that beast. Don't think that for a second. Because it was Team Blue that presided over the most heinous slaughter that many of us have witnessed in our lives. For the first time, evil that we had confronted only in history books, teaching about the Belgian occupation of the Congo, teaching about the extermination campaign against European Jews. We always wondered, how did that happen? What did it look like? How did white men stand atop a hill of thousands of bison skulls and smile proudly for the cameras? Well, now we all know, don't we? And it was Team Blue that ushered in that era, unrepentant. Malcolm, who became on that night when I was 15 years old, my forever teacher. Whenever I'm confused, I go back to Malcolm. Malcolm said, the liberal is a fox. It bares its teeth, you think it's smiling at you, but you are on the menu. The conservative is a wolf. When it bares its teeth, it's into a vicious snarl that leaves the Negro with no illusion as to where he stands. Malcolm said in 63 and 64 that the black community was caught between two predators that differ only in the modality of the hunt. One hunts by guile and by cunning, the other by sheer brute force. And he adduced that the first of these, that liberal fox, was the more dangerous of the two. In 1964, Malcolm said the white liberal is the most dangerous thing in the Western Hemisphere. I hope Gavin Newsom is listening. We all know the NSA listening anyway. They'll get the transcript later. Gavin will get his transcript later. When Malcolm said this in 64, white conservatives were hanging Negroes from trees, just like they're doing in Mississippi and just like they're painting on Eureka walls. White conservatives were turning dogs and fire hoses on black protesters. White conservatives were putting bullets in the back of the heads of white voting rights activists and burying them next to Mississippi roads in shallow graves. And Malcolm said what he said. And Malcolm was not wrong. Because an open enemy is less dangerous to you than a concealed enemy. An enemy that announces its enmity rather than hiding behind lies and deception, double dealing, and false promises is much easier to deal with. In this nadir that is emerging, we have a prime opportunity for what the Marxists like to call the heightening of contradictions. People are going to see what this system is and what it is really capable of. And they will understand. Listen, I'm a historian by training. I'm not a soothsayer. I don't predict the future. But the one thing that I know for sure is Team Blue ain't coming to the rescue. Can I get a witness from the congregation? I'm Muslim, but I'm still going to do that from time to time. I was raised in a black rhetorical tradition that is based on call and response. I'm not going to let y'all sit there for an hour and listen to me talk. That's not how this is going to go down. So y'all better get ready. Appreciate that. And I love that energy. That's exactly the energy. So understand that this has been a co-produced darkness, a co-produced nadir that has been handed to us by two neoliberal parties. And when I say neoliberal, don't get confused with liberal versus conservative. Neoliberalism is not situated in that ideological scale. Neoliberalism is a political economy. It is what Ronald Reagan called trickle-down economics. It's hand everything to the private sector and let them do it so that they can take a cut off of the top. And both of these parties, Team Blue and Team Red, are neoliberal parties. They're both parties that feed corporations out of the public trough. They just have overlapping and sometimes competing patronage networks. But if you were to make a Venn diagram of the donor base of Team Blue and Team Red, you're going to be damn near a single circle. Because AIPAC is going to be smack dab in the middle of it. Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, 5 weapons manufacturers that receive something on the order of 50 to 60% of the United States defense budget. Palantirs, they're the late comers. They're running in to try to feed from that trough just now. Even your Spotify executives, I hope y'all cancel Spotify. Even your Spotify executives are now investing in weapons technology. So those donors run both of those parties. They run Team Blue and Team Red. And they also are essentially 5 corporations that control your entire media environment. All of your print and broadcast media. From about 50 companies controlling what you consume in the media in 1983, 90% of it was split between 50 companies. Now that is down to 5 companies. And now we have essentially 4 tech bros that control your entire social media environment. This is an environment that has been completely taken over by neoliberal capitalism, and it comes in blue flavor or red flavor. You can pick your blue Kool-Aid or your red Kool-Aid. That's a Jonestown reference. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. That shit'll kill you. Do not drink the Kool-Aid. But they are constantly pumping you full of these narratives that you are incapable of fundamentally changing the system, that you have to choose between nail polish remover and turpentine and drink as much, a gallon of each, or whichever you pick. It's designed to disempower you. We'll go back to Malcolm on this. Malcolm said, never let your enemy tell you how many of you there are.
Yeah.
Do you hear it? Free the chains on your consciousness and your perception first. He didn't stop there because Malcolm had all of the bars. Malcolm said, never let the man that you are against form your opinions for you. Do not let these people colonize your consciousness to the point that you think that your resistance is futile, that your organization is doomed. Because in point of fact, they know precisely how fragile empire has always been, and especially how fragile it is at this moment. And all of those signs of repression that came from the Biden regime and now from the Trump regime trying to stomp down your pro-Palestinian speech, those are all signs of weakness, not of strength. It is the sign that they have lost control of the narrative and are desperate to seize it back by force. But it cannot be seized by force because we have freedom stories. We telling a different story in here tonight, y'all. We are telling a story of inevitable liberation. And we're telling the story of how we can use the tools of electoral politics to help us get free. Now, on the flyer, it says you're going to hear from Professor Ware about how he went from being a professor and got pulled into politics. That was on the flyer. And I like to keep promises, even when I wasn't involved in making them. I didn't design that flyer. It's a dope flyer, and I love the fist, picture. Like, let's go with that. No, I mean, seriously. We'll talk more about some Panther organizing principles in a moment, but first, I'm going to make a case for electoral politics. And I'm going to make a case for electoral politics by answering the question of how I got dragged into this in the first place. So, unless you are either black or Muslim, but especially if you're black and Muslim, you would definitely have heard of me before Jill Stein called me onto the campaign, right? Probably you would have seen me posting first in 2020 about the murder of George Floyd, because I got on social media in 2020 the week that George Floyd was murdered. That was the first time I ever had a social media account. And it was because I understood that we were entering endgame for empire. And that anything that I had been teaching in face-to-face community interactions like this one, and I've been speaking all over the black community and the Muslim community for a couple of decades. I'm just not a social media person. Wasn't built for that. You wouldn't know that now. I'd be posting a lot. but it's just the truth. So all of that is to say that I knew that whatever organizing and activist and educational work I had been doing in communities now needed to be broadcast to as many people as possible, because this is not a drill, this is what we have been drilling for. And I'm gonna tell you, ever since I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, I've been doing push-ups on my knuckles, waiting to get tagged into the game. Right? But I didn't think that that was going to be electoral politics, because I've been doing the work of an organizer and an activist and an educator for decades and never gave a second thought to electoral politics. And the way that I got pulled into it is that I interviewed Dr. Jill Stein for my Instagram platform, I did an IG Live. And the reason for that is that everybody in the Palestine liberation community, and especially the Palestinian Americans, were supporting Jill's campaign. And so I was presented with the opportunity to interview her, and I interviewed her. And I'll recall two pieces. The first was, I asked her, what's your stance on reparations? Because I had just posted a reel about Kamala Harris asked about reparations, and she hemmed and hawed and shucked and jived for a full 2 minutes. And she did a whole soft shoe. And then, some people won't get that. I'm not gonna dance it. But I love this, like y'all are my people, I know this right now. And at the end of that, soft shoe, she said, I will never do anything that only helps black people. I know, it's crazy. Because I was thinking, yeah, because when did America do anything that only helped black people? Wow. So I asked Jill about reparations, and she said they behave as though it's incalculable, but it's been calculated by experts many times. It's between $10 and $14 trillion that are owed to the descendants of the enslaved, and I'm in favor of cash payments. And I was like, okay, this white lady might be onto something. And then I asked the second question, and I said, I know that you are an anti-Zionist Jew. I know that you have been 10 toes down for Palestine. You got arrested at a Free Palestine march. And she's still trying to beat those charges right now, low-key. High-key, she's still trying to beat those charges right now. Right? So I said, I'm not going to ask you your stance on Palestine. If your stance on Palestine wasn't where it needed to be, we wouldn't be having this conversation in the first place. I said, what's your overall vision for American foreign policy? And she said, to dismantle the American empire. Yeah, and I said, literally, without missing a beat, I said, yeah, you better hurry and do it quick too before somebody do it for you. Because those two things look very different. Taking the $1.3 trillion a year that's squandered on the military-industrial complex and trying to maintain 800 military bases all over the planet when the next highest country has 30 is insanely expensive. And if you were to divest from all of that immiseration of the rest of humanity and invest instead in education, in housing, in healthcare, then your republic may just survive the inevitable collapse of its empire. Great conversation, hour and 20 minutes long. You can find it on my social media platform to this day. 24 hours later, I got a call. I was coming home from the movies with my wife, and they asked if I would get on a Zoom, and they asked me if I would consider running as vice president. 24 hours after that meeting. I'm not joking. That's how it happened. And so I had to do a lot of soul searching and thinking about this because I never considered electoral politics to be the answer, precisely because neither Team Blue nor Team Red, none of those corporate-owned parties are worth a good goddamn, and you can't trust them no further than you can throw them. But in that moment, when presented with this opportunity, I said to them, I said, listen, I'm going to talk to my friends, I'm going to talk to my family, I'm going to talk to my spiritual mentors, I'm going to pray on it. I said, but while I'm doing that, y'all need to run tape on me. Because I'm not going to soften any of this. And it means that you're bringing a whole ass Muslim revolutionary, black Muslim revolutionary, onto the top of the ticket. And you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Because I will be pulling exactly 0 punches. And they said, that's why we want you. I said, y'all better be careful what you ask for. So this is where this becomes part of our general conversation, is I had to go back to my teachers, and I had to go back to Malcolm. And I'm going to make a post about this probably later tonight or tomorrow, but on the weekend of the 27th and 28th, I'm doing an online seminar. My team doesn't want me to call it the Ballad or the Bullet because of the whole Charlie Kirk thing. But you know I'm going to call it that anyway. And the subtitle is the Electoral Politics of Liberation. And it's based on going back to Malcolm's 1964 speech, The Ballad of the Bullet. So when I was trying to decide whether this was the appropriate avenue for intervention under these circumstances, I had to go back to those teachers. And Malcolm in 1964, so he gave that Ballad of the Bullet speech at least twice. There's different versions, and much like me, well, I guess I'm much like Malcolm in this way, is that I don't be speaking from prepared notes. I have 4 or 5 things that I want to talk about, and I talk about them in the way that they come. So each of those speeches was different from Malcolm, but they all centered around this same theme. America's got a choice. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. But it's going to be either the ballad or the bullet. That you cannot let this societal collapse continue unabated before people will begin to rise up. Because we are taking our liberation, and it will be wise if y'all let us take it at the electoral box. John F. Kennedy, and don't get me wrong, I'm not a big Kennedy fan, sorry. Every American president has been a war criminal. 0 exceptions. And that goes twice for that black imperialist Obama. Seriously, like, blackface, minstrel imperialism is not my cup of tea. But I digress. Don't even get me started on Obama. Put me in, don't put that in the Q&A. I'll be here all night talking about how mad I am at Obama selling us out. Malcolm said in that 64 speech, The Ballad of the Bullet, he said, so it was definitely an unconcealed threat. So Kennedy said, sorry to finish that part, Kennedy said, whoever makes peaceful revolution impossible makes violent revolution inevitable. Kennedy said that. And what is that if not the basic argument of the Ballad of the Bullet? And if you can go back to either one of those versions of Malcolm's speech, and he's going through that in different ways, but there was a subtext that I had never noticed. Malcolm said in that same speech, he said, we're going to knock on every door in Harlem, and we are going to register every black face behind every black door, not as a Democrat, not as a Republican, but as an independent. Malcolm wanted to leverage electoral politics as a tool for displaying community power. And then he continued and he said, and whoever behind that door doesn't have the responsibility to register themselves, then we're going to run them out of town. The ballot or the bullet was not just a threat for America. The ballot or the bullet was a threat to people who did not embrace the possibility of electoral political reform as part of an overall revolutionary toolkit. And when I heard Malcolm saying that, I realized, wait a minute, Huey P. Newton ran for Congress not once but twice. Bobby Seale ran for mayor in Oakland. Kwame Ture, who I'm going to talk a lot about in a moment, formerly Stokely Carmichael, he said, voting every 4 years, he said, I've never been a Democrat. He said, I would never. And he said, and voting every 4 years is the height of bourgeois irresponsibility. He said, but I would shed my blood for the vote. And I did shed my blood for the vote. Remember, he was organizing on those Mississippi roads with SNCC. They were all strapped, by the way. Even King was strapped back then. Back to that self-defense thing. What Kwame Ture said is he said, voting every 4 years is the height of bourgeois irresponsibility, but I would shed my blood for the vote because I know the vote is how I organize my people. See, campaigns and electoral politics help channel the people's energy and move them towards a collective goal. And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but I need one more bar from Malcolm before we can close this out. Malcolm said, we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. Say it back. We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. 5 check failed. Say it with your chest. Come on, say it with your chest. We are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. Excellent, because capitalism is organized. White supremacy is Imperialism is organized. It needs to be met with organized resistance. I mentioned Kwame Ture. He said, we need to cultivate an understanding of the distinction between mobilization and organization. He never said exactly the words that I'm about to say next. This is my synthesis of a bunch of different, thank you. We were getting dangerously low. This is my synthesis of a bunch of different pieces from what Kwame Ture said. But I want you to commit these words, if you can, to memory. I'm not going to make you say them back. Revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues. Revolutionaries organize against systems. Revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues. Revolutionaries organize against systems. The distinction between mobilization and organization, Ture said, is very poorly understood. He said King was a great mobilizer, not a great organizer. He couldn't get himself named the head of the National Baptist Convention, despite the fact that he was the most popular Baptist preacher in America many times over. He said Malcolm was a great mobilizer and a great organizer. Everywhere Malcolm went, he left an institution. When he was in the nation, everywhere he went, he left a mosque. When he came out of the nation and into Sunni Islam, he established a mosque. It's still there on 116th Street in Harlem. I'd be praying there. Before y'all knew me from politics, every year I would give the speech on Malcolm X Day, commemorating his birth. That institution is still there. Malcolm cleared a field that others can farm in even when he's gone. That's one of the pieces that distinguishes mobilization from organization. Kwame Ture said mobilization is temporary and ephemeral. Organization is permanent and durable. Why am I insisting on this distinction in this moment? Because going back to 2020, when I first got on the internet, basically, we saw the greatest mass mobilization against police brutality that any of us have ever witnessed, correct? Yeah. I've been black my whole life, and I never seen so many white people at a police brutality protest. And I'll be blunt about this. Like, part of the reason why I got on the internet at that time is that I was born in DC, grew up on the south side of Minneapolis. I was actually stopped 17 times by Minneapolis police before I got to my 17th birthday. And one of the times, I had an officer pull his service weapon on me and point it at my face when I reached into my starter jacket to produce the identification that he had asked me to produce. It was 6 blocks away from where George Floyd would be choked out a couple of decades later. And yes, I am dating myself when I say starter jacket. I understand that.
I remember.
And yes, because I'm 51. And no, even light-skinned black don't crack. When you moisturize and you take care of it, and you use all of those ancestral traditions, you can keep it looking smooth. Can I get a witness? We saw, the first time that I marched in a protest against police violence against black people, it was because in South Minneapolis, a kid in my neighborhood was killed in his own backyard playing with a water pistol, shot by police in his own yard. And when I came out to that march, my mom was the only white person there. 2020, we got white folks outnumbering black folks 3-1 at these marches. Latinos outnumbering black folks 2-1 at these marches. Afro-Latinos included in both categories. I'm not trying to erase the Afro-Latinos. I will never do that. More mass mobilization on the question of police brutality and violence against black people than any of us have ever witnessed. If you're black, you know what I'm talking about. We never expected to see so many other folks at those protests. But it's mass mobilization around the issue rather than organization against the system. So what happened? Team Blue takes office, and police have killed more people in every year since 2020. They have set a new record. How do you have greatest mobilization around the issue, but escalating police violence? And do you know that in the United States of America, 1 in 3 stranger homicides is when a police officer kills a civilian?
No, I didn't know that.
No. 1 in 3 stranger homicides is when a police officer kills a civilian, because they hit you with all that propaganda that makes you think that the police are there to serve and protect, when police come out of slave patrols, policing Indian land, and strike breaking in northeastern cities. Those are the 3 cradles of American policing. It's policing stolen people, stolen land, and stolen labor. But because we didn't organize against the system, we just mobilized around the issue, we've seen a consistent escalation. And many of y'all, we tried to warn you about what these cops are going to do and why they're building all these cop cities in the first place. And that connects to our second point. Raise your hand if you unplugged from the matrix after October 7th. It's okay. Raise your hand if you just learned about Palestinian liberation, really learned about it in October 7th of 2023. That's a lot of people, right? A lot of people. Because we've been subjected to continuous propaganda run by Zionists. But I have to admit, I raised my hand just in solidarity. I was not one of those people. And the reason is that Malcolm said, he wrote in 1964 a piece called Zionist Logic, where he derided Zionism. And in his own personal field notebooks, he said this is a white Jewish population being empowered by white European imperial powers to move brown Arabs off their land. So Malcolm, in his own hands, said that Zionism is white supremacy. And that's how I've always understood it. And that's how all of the black radical tradition has collectively understood Zionism. Kwame Ture. SNCC was essentially targeted because they took an anti-Zionist position very early on. But it wasn't just Kwame Ture or Malcolm. James Baldwin, 1979, open letter to the born again, said the state of Israel was not created for the salvation of the Jews. The state of Israel was created for the salvation of Western interests. This has been the unanimous position. So Assata Shakur is in it. Toni Morrison was in it. That's before you even get to the Africans. Thomas Sankara, Nelson Mandela, and so on. This has been the universal position of the black radical tradition, is that this is a struggle against an aspect of white supremacy. It's an ethnic variant of white supremacy, the same way that German Nazism was an ethnic variant of white supremacy, the same way that British imperialism operationalized regional variants of white supremacy. And we got our own homegrown version here, right down to Eureka. Why am I mentioning this? Because none of us that have been on this since day one expected the mass mobilization around Palestinian liberation that we've seen. We never saw so many non-Palestinians in those gatherings, so many normies in these gatherings, right? Mass mobilization around this issue, but 2 years into a genocide, and they continue the slaughter unabated. Kwame Ture said, nonviolent protest depends on your opponent having a conscience, and America has none. You cannot make an appeal, a moral appeal through protest to these people. Because if they had morality, they wouldn't be oppressors. You have to contest them for power, and that takes organizing, not just mobilizing. We've seen all of the mobilizing, but without the organization against the system. Bring it now close to home as possible. Here inside the state of California, we have masked men rolling up on our neighbors, armed, refusing to identify themselves, kidnapping people and throwing them into trucks and making them disappear. And we have the LAPD, Santa Ana PD, all of these police departments running cover and carrying water for extra legal federal abductions in our communities. They're called ICE. We have seen more mobilization against ICE than we've ever seen before. More solidarity with our immigrant brothers and sisters. And it's not just Latinos, by the way, like the Vietnamese community, South Korean community, blacks of every background. Because it's just white supremacy, stupid. It's not, there isn't anything else in it, right? It has one ingredient. It's pure, uncut. And let me just say before I go any further, because I know this is, inside the university, this can't be an official campaign event, but as governor of the state of California, I would not obey any unconstitutional federal orders. That's right. Which means that ICE is going to have to go through every single lawyer and law enforcement officer in the state before they touch a hair on the head of any California resident, irrespective of their status. And any of these police departments found with their hands in the cookie jar, I'm prosecuting them. They're going to learn today. That'll teach them real good. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. If you are going to, because in principle, you're supposed to be able to call law enforcement if somebody rolls up on you unidentified, in a mask, with a gun, and tries to put you in a van and take you to a second location. Yeah, that's called a kidnapping, and you're supposed to be able to call law enforcement for that. They're not supposed to be the ones facilitating and aiding. So I'm a prosecutor. But why am I mentioning it in this context? Keep that mobilization versus organization frame. We have seen more mobilization for ICE abolition. We've never seen this level of solidarity with our Latino brothers and sisters. But we are not seeing movement because Team Blue will not even offer token resistance. They are actually still facilitating and enabling all of these abductions because we're not organizing against the system, we're mobilizing around the issue. Now, what holds the three issues together? White supremacy, imperialism, and capitalism. They are all actually the same problem, and they are rooted in those two capitalist, corporate, white supremacist, imperialist parties. You cannot solve the issue without organizing against the system that produces it. Right. It's like applying a Band-Aid to a gunshot wound. Or better yet, since we're in Malcolm's presence and aura tonight, Malcolm said, if you have a knife in my side 9 inches and you take it out 6 inches, that ain't progress. I'll never call it progress. He said progress will be taking the knife out of the wound and then tending it. Y'all won't even admit the knife is there. The damage is ongoing, it is continuous. We have to organize against the system to fight back. And that system is both Team Blue and Team Red. And I know a lot of y'all used to be Democrats. So one more from Malcolm. Malcolm said of the Democrats, you put them first and they put you last. And that makes you a chump. That makes you a political chump. Well, ain't y'all tired of being chumped? Aren't y'all tired of cosplay resistance that is actually just complicity with capitalism, imperialism, and white supremacy? It is the liberal iteration of it. And Kwame Ture, in The Pitfalls of Liberalism, said, of course, when the final confrontation comes, the liberal will be on the side of the oppressor. Democrats, that's your cue. The good news, and I promised y'all I would end on good news, is that all empires fall. You see, we're back where we started. What I would add humbly to Malcolm's statement about us not being outnumbered but out-organized, to Kwame Ture's argument that revolutionaries don't just mobilize around issues but organize against systems, is that it is the role of a revolutionary political party to help channel the people's energy the energy of the masses, from mobilization around issues to organization against systems, right? Because what we're seeing in Palestine and what we're seeing in Los Angeles and what we're seeing in Mississippi are just different faces of white supremacist capitalism and imperialism. It's the imperial boomerang that Aimé Césaire described and that Frantz Fanon then made famous. And do you know these rotten academics have tried to attribute that to Foucault? Don't ever tell me that liberals don't do white supremacy as well as conservatives do, because I've been an academic for 20 years. It is the role of a revolutionary political party to channel the people's energies from mobilization around siloed issues to organization against the system. So why did I accept this invitation? And why do I think that we can win now? Because I said to Jill then that you invited a whole ass Muslim, black Muslim revolutionary onto the ticket, and that's gonna have implications. It means that we're going to turn this party into the revolutionary party that channels people's energy from mobilization around siloed issues. They handed the party to me. Dr. Jill is 75 years old. She's not running for president again. This party, such as it is, and it has had its limitations historically. It's never done the work on the ground that it needed to do. That's why I'm in Humboldt. That's why I don't be sleeping. That's why I've been up and down this state, because there's one way to do this, and it is the Panthers model. The Panthers model was to bring together mutual aid, direct action, and electoral politics. That's your liberation solution.
Right.
And Huey P. Newton said this in Revolutionary Suicide. He said, everyone was fascinated with the image of armed black men, and I understand that. He said, but the Panthers' 10-point program, before you even got to self-defense, the first six pieces of it, the first 6 points, were all survival programs. It was about meeting people's basic needs and taking care of them. It was about direct action to keep oppression and harm from reaching communities. So if you go to my website, and again, it's not a campaign event, but I think I can give you the website, butchwareforgov.com, you'll see mutual aid plus direct action plus electoral politics. Because I had to be persuaded that electoral politics was part of the solution, but I now know that it for sure is, because the corporate takeover of our social media environment and our media environment and our political environment is so total that elections are one of the few places where we can actually assert our power in the system, and they will only respond to power. You cannot reason with them, you cannot argue with them, you have to organize for power that is independent of them. The way that that can happen here in the state of California is over the next 9 months, we actually have a chance to steal the power back from these people, from these war criminals and fascists. And the reason is that they've set up this scam where they try to make sure that they get one blue candidate versus one red candidate so the duopoly can go on uncontested in perpetuity. And they do that by having what they call a jungle primary. Only the top 2 candidates advance, irrespective of party. But that can backfire in a state that has as many registered independents as it has registered Republicans. It can backfire when you hide that primary on June 2nd of 2026, when people aren't expecting to vote. Now they're hoping for low voter turnout because that endorses the status quo. Only 5.5 million people voted in the 2022 gubernatorial primary. But what if you have energized, engaged, specific communities? You can wreck their little primary. I'll give you an example. Y'all might not know that in the 2024 presidential election, 53% of American Muslims voted for the Steinway ticket. 53% nationwide. Only 20% for Team Blue Genocide, 20% for Team Red Fascism. You haven't been told about that in the media. But there are 1 million Muslims just in the state of California. The second place finisher in the 2022 primary got 17% of the vote. And that created a one-on-one showdown with Gavin Newsom, the Democratic candidate. Now, it was a very mediocre Republican, and it was an incumbent, so that was an uphill fight. But there is no incumbent, and the field is incredibly mediocre on the Democrat side. Asked me about it during the Q&A, but because I was a VP candidate, they had to allow me to participate in those gubernatorial forums. And I'm catching bodies every time we go in. Every time. Why am I mentioning it? Because if we can get to 17%, 18% of 5.5 million people on June 2nd, it's going to create a one-on-one between whichever Democrat is running to become the new Gavin Newsom, and it's probably going to be Katie Porter. Katie, I stand with Israel Porter. Do you understand the opportunity? Because all empires fall, and all revolutions and counterinsurgencies start somewhere. And I've been teaching and writing about the history of successful anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, anti-white supremacist movements from West Africa through the United States Black radical tradition. It's literally the thing that I've been studying my whole life. I was the last one expecting to be tagged into the fight. But once I'm tagged into a fight, I don't leave the fight until the other guy goes down. And I don't care how many times I get knocked down in the process, I'm getting back up and I'm coming for his chin. We have an opportunity. The principal obstacle between us is that organization that Malcolm and Kwame Ture drove us to. But the principal obstacle to that organization is that internal colonization that we addressed from the beginning. You have to rid yourself of the false idea that you cannot do this. Because in point of fact, it is easily within reach if you would only believe. Peace.
We will win. Come on, I believe that we will win.
I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I believe that
We will win. Come on. All right, listen, man, I'm really glad I came to Humboldt. Because we're supposed to do Q&A now, and I know we have Q&A, and I hope we have time, to do it. I might have gone a little long, but as Fred Hampton, famously said, I was a little high off the people. So let's take that time for Q&A now. We're gonna have this moderated. Is that you?
No, we have 2 mics.
Oh, we have 2 mics. Okay, perfect. And I've got a pen and paper. Thank you again for the pen and paper, so I can try to keep track of the questions. So are they gonna read the cards, or what's the method here? You want me to read this one? Okay. Two-sided question.
All right.
Okay. So I will not be strapped personally. Is that okay with you? I never want to hold a gun. I love this question so much. Because of course it's okay. Self-defense, and again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to borrow some Islamic legal theory, is it's what's called in the Islamic tradition a fard kifaya, which means a collective obligation. It's not an individual obligation. If there are people in the community that are providing for defense of the community, then it's not incumbent upon you personally to do it. Nor is it something that's appropriate for everyone to do. Now, having said that, don't let your gender identity or your age or whatever convince you that this isn't something for you necessarily. If it's something that isn't for you as a matter of principle, as a matter of personal preference, stand on that. And the Green Party position is that we always favor nonviolence, but self-defense, as I said before, is not violence. And when I said don't let your age or gender identity, I was actually thinking about Fannie Lou Hamer. Because Fannie Lou Hamer famously said, when she was in the midst of her organizing work in the Deep South, she said, "Aren't you afraid of attacks from the Klan?" And she She said, I'm gonna try to get her exact words. She said, I don't worry about attacks from the Klan because I keep a loaded shotgun in every room.
That's right.
Any white boy want to burn a cross on my lawn ain't never gonna write his mama again. So, if you never want to hold or you never want to hold again, but have people that are looking out for you, right? Have people that are taking care of you, and it should be the responsibility of the community to make sure that happens. The endorsement that I'm most proud of that we got last week was an endorsement from the National Brown Beret, right? That's an organization that in the tradition of the Panthers is providing for communal self-defense. And when they wouldn't give us any Secret Service on the presidential campaign, I was like, I didn't want y'all Secret Service anyway. Because one, you know,
They're gonna be Charlie Kirk.
yeah, it's always the inside guy anyway. They're gonna move out of the way. No, listen, I got shooters in every city. I'm just gonna be blunt about that. I don't have to be one carrier. Yeah. So excellent question. Other questions? Yeah. And sorry, I'm just making the transition to contact lenses, so the people in the back really need to stand up and wave. All right. Ooh. All right, I'm gonna take the first one. Would you consider campaigning on California seceding as an independent republic? Can we turn the cameras off for this one?
No. No.
There's a lot of context to this as a historian, okay? And I'm just gonna provide some of it. I said in January, when Trump first took office and began his theatrics of escalation, because by the way, he is still chasing the deportation records that were set by Biden and Obama. Understand that he's still trying to keep up with the Democrats. It's just that the optics of terror are different. The Democrats have to hide it because they have to pretend to be the friends of people of color, and the Republicans have to broadcast it because that's the way that they throw red meat to the white supremacist core that's at the bottom of their base, right? But understand that Trump is still chasing. But when he began, but the theatrics, when they began, I said that the thing that this is most reminiscent of is the 1851 passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. Because they've essentially made every single state complicit in federally sponsored kidnappings. Right? You are put in a position where you're either going to jump in to stop your neighbors from being kidnapped, or you're going to become complicit in that. And that sharpened the contradiction in the 1850s. What I said in a social media post about this is that the 1851 Fugitive Slave Act was the proximate cause that led to the Civil War. And in a state like California, where the largest minority group, you guys might think that Latinos are the largest minority group in the state of California. You would be incorrect. White people are the largest minority group in the state of California because the largest ethnic group in the state of California is Latino.
Right.
40% Latino, 34% white, 12% Asian, 6% African American. So in a state like California, these kidnappings and abductions are even more heinous, and yes, they are going to push people towards radical solutions. Another relevant and pertinent example is that in the 1850s, the Republican Party, which was then the abolitionist party, they flipped real fast, that's a separate question. They were an abolitionist party. They were getting 2% of the vote in national elections, and Lincoln was president of the United States 6 years later. So would I run at this point in time on California secession? No, it wouldn't be wise as a strategic move to run on that at this point in time. Could I see a scenario wherein the escalations continue to reach such grievous points and Team Blue continues to provide such feckless, impotent, useless responses that pondering something like that would become necessary? Of course. We can all imagine scenarios wherein things actually do get that bad. Because as I said, we are entering a deep, dark phase in American history. And like I said, the ballot of the bullet, like this gubernatorial election in 2026 has the potential to break the duopoly, and it might be the last free election that we get. Sorry. Work on making my way through. What are your thoughts on Prop 50 about using fire to fight fire, gerrymandering versus gerrymandering? I love this question because it takes us back to Fred Hampton again, right? And I said this in a media interview that hasn't come out yet with Politica Pendejada. It's a great podcaster. I was asked about Prop 50 shortly after it happened, and I quoted Fred Hampton. You don't fight fire with fire best, you fight fire with water best. We don't fight disenfranchisement with disenfranchisement. That just leads to more disenfranchisement. You fight it with democracy. And contrary to popular belief, the Democrats have been the principal obstacles in front of the thing that would actually solve the problem of gerrymandering for 3 decades. The solution to gerrymandering is ranked choice voting, multi-member districts, and proportional representation. The winner-take-all separation is part of that culture war logic that keeps you banging on the other team. And the only gangs that wear blue and red that I acknowledge are not Bloods and Crips. They're Democrats and Republicans, because those are the most dangerous gang organizations that have ever existed in human history.
Yes.
So this is just more gangbanging. And I'm going to tell you the fundamental issue with it is that how does disenfranchising California voters help Californians? What's happening is that California is being used as a pawn or a prop in a national political struggle between the DNC and the RNC. We are just props, and we are part of Gavin Newsom's campaign for president. That's what this is about, and that's why his face keeps popping up every time you try to watch a YouTube video. Anybody else having this problem? You keep getting this Prop 50 propaganda. Do you know how much that is costing you? You're paying for that bullshit. And why is it a problem? It's a problem because it literally has many of our compatriots bringing their own chains to the plantation. Because what you are doing if you support Prop 50 is that you are setting up the Democrat Party to have permanent control over politics in the state of California and uncontested, unassailable authority. It's literally like bringing your own chains to the slave plantation and say, here, boss, lock me up. I'm scared of that Trump over there. That's all it is. Do not fall for that. It is one of the greatest psyops that I've ever seen, to have people signing up to give a political party that has run this state into the ground permanent control over the state's electoral politics. Madness. Is that a hand?
Yeah, I have a question.
Please. Is there another mic? Just take this one.
How would you define intersectionality? Like, how would you define just like the word intersectionality? Like, what is it?
How would I define intersectionality?
Yeah.
Intersectionality for me is not about.
Not like personally, like just like objective definition, not
Yeah,
personal.
that's what I was trying to do. Intersectionality is not about identity so much as it is about location and systems of power. And intersectionality is understanding that where you are positioned inside of systems of power is going to vary on different elements of who you are, but it is actually about power more than it is about identity. And intersectionality, properly understood, is the foundation of all collective liberation. For it to be politically functional and effective, this is the reason why it's at the bottom of the website, solidarity beyond ideology or identity, that's literally what I'm alluding to. And there's one other part of it, and I'll come back to let you ask the follow-up question, because there's one piece that I just want to add. The ideology part is also important to me, because there are a lot of leftists that get off on toxic infighting over ideology. And as somebody that is both raised up in the third world Pan-Africanist socialist tradition, but also in the Islamic revolutionary tradition represented by Malcolm and by a bunch of anti-capitalist revolutionaries that were born before Marx ever was and who are still fighting against capitalism and imperialism, I understand that people are going to have different points of view on political ideology, and that you don't actually have to share my political ideology in order to be in solidarity about restoring power and autonomy back to the people. So a lot of leftists, unfortunately, don't understand that Marxism is their religion. And because they don't understand that that's their faith system, they can often be intolerant. So intersectionality is about positioning in systems of power, and we should be thinking carefully about how identities and ideologies are being used as a tool of divide and conquer to keep us from reenacting the solidarity that made the Panthers so dangerous. They took out Fred Hampton. They took out Fred Hampton not because the Panthers were armed, but because the Panthers figured out, minus the misogyny, an important aspect of intersectionality. The Panthers brought the young lords, they brought the young patriots, right? They were creating multiracial coalitions that moved beyond identity, and that's when Fred Hampton got taken out. When Malcolm came out of the nation and was no longer operating according to a racialist logic, he became an infinitely more dangerous opponent to empire because he was moving outside of narrowly confined spaces of identity. So intersectionality requires an awareness of where we are situated in matrices of power, and our solidarity requires, not falling for the divide and conquer.
Okay. The thing I'm wondering is how you're going to determine what issues are important for us to approach, because it's a lot of contradictions. You started with saying intersectionality is not about your identity, then you said it's about how you use your identity to a person. It's like, yes, but you're also saying that Democrats are one team, blue team, red team, there's different teams, there's different enemies against each other, and then saying you're also aiming for collection beyond identity, but if everyone's an enemy to each other, how are you going to get that collection? And how is a political party seen as what about it is seen as idiotic instead of an issue to approach? Why can't you, why is it that they're idiots instead of a different perspective to the issue if you could get intersectionality as that?
So if I understand the question appropriately, we're operating on a couple of different predicates. The first is that I don't see, so I consider that our political discourse is designed to make people think of Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative as core elements of their identity. And I'm making an argument that that is a weaponized use of identity politics that is designed to essentially lift our civil rights and liberties from us and also lift our resources, to take money out of our pockets and rights away from us. And I'm rooted in a simple demographic understanding of where we sit, which is that still to this day, despite the massive media control that is constantly pumping red state versus blue state at us, that 38% of Americans still identify as independents, 30% identify as Democrats, 25% identify as Republicans. So I'm still operating under the idea that despite the massive persuasion effort that is trying to collapse people's personal identities into one of these two party affiliations, that most people, ordinary people, are not actually part of that camp. I just don't believe that to be the case. I don't think that I called anybody an idiot, so I'm not sure where that entered into the conversation.
When the other question was asking about the succession and like you said that sometimes it's a radical, you said it was people will go for radical solutions, but if the Democrats weren't feckless, impotent, useless, then you would.
Right, so I still don't hear the word idiot in there. I'm not.
Somebody impotent?
Well, I'm not calling anybody impotent. I'm calling the politics of the party impotent, and I stand by that statement. And I'll take the next question.
Does
Thanks.
impotent not mean?
Yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't.
So, or
It doesn't. It's ineffective.
You want the mic?
No, I'm here.
calling somebody
If you were to say
bad.
what you meant the system, every church in California, we have the biggest recognized tribe in California. And what is your plan to help the tribe?
Yeah, what's the plan to help tribes here in California? It was also on one of the cards, and thank you for bringing it up. The first thing that I'll just mention is that if you go to our initial campaign announcement, land back and reparations are on the same line. That there is no political future for any collective liberation that does not restore the indigenous peoples of this land to their ancestral position as stewards of this land. Period. Colonialism and imperialism have produced a profound violence, not just against our human communities, but against the earth itself, because the people that have established these political systems were not indigenous to this land, and they had no stake in its protection. And I am a Green Party candidate. I believe that environmental justice and social justice are connected, and there is no way of resolving either of those issues without centering Native American communities first. And only after saying that, in other words, talking about where we're situated in systems of power, will I mention that like many African Americans, on my father's side, he's from Georgia. So both of my maternal grandmothers, Hattie and Clara, were both Seminole. The one a quarter Seminole, the one half. And I don't advertise my indigenous ancestry because it has not been an important part of my political identity as how I move in the world. I was raised in DC when it was 94% black. I've been black my whole life. But I do think that it's important that we honor those sacred ancestral ties to this land, and that we especially honor the stewards of this land. So everything in my campaign is going to be about empowerment, and I'll just literally say that the thing that we're currently fundraising for is an Indigenous outreach coordinator, because I can't have that be a volunteer position anymore. That needs to be somebody that is a dedicated staff member that works only on answering questions, what's the best way that we could be of service. And the last thing that I'll say on that, just to flesh out a point of political theory that didn't make its way into the main talk, is that mutual aid, direct action, and electoral politics means showing up in service to the people that are already doing the liberation work on the ground and putting a political party at their disposition. So that means that my social media platform, any issues that you want to raise, I'm gonna amplify those, and I'm gonna blast those, and I'm gonna get eyes on those, and we're gonna try to leverage institutional resources to the people that are doing the liberation work on the ground in indigenous communities.
And sir, we got a young person back here.
Yeah, oh yeah. Let me bring you a mic.
public schools look like under Governor Ware?
Can I get a high five? Okay. What would public schools look like under Governor Ware? As an educator, this question is close to my heart. So, one of the first things that you see on the platform is, I'll get to the lower levels of education in a moment, but free tuition higher education. You should not be going into debt in order to get a college education. It shouldn't be a thing at all. And in point of fact, it didn't used to be a thing. We used to have free tuition higher education in the state of California until Reagan was governor. And Reagan, literally under counsel from Nixon said that this free education is producing an educated proletariat. Y'all get the words right with me. It's producing an educated proletariat. So at the intersection of that capitalist nonsense and Reagan and Nixon's really deep-rooted racism, just really quickly, there's surviving hot mic audio of Reagan and Nixon talking to each other when African dignitaries from newly independent African nations visited the White House. And he said, look at them, it's their first time wearing shoes and suits. He called them monkeys. Ronald Reagan is as black-hearted an SOB, I'm not gonna curse because it was a child that asked the question. So he got rid of free tuition higher education to keep that proletariat, educated proletariat from coming into being, and because he didn't like black people knowing how to read. Literally, that's why we don't have it. So bringing back free tuition higher education is easy. But the way that we solve the problem of education, what it's gonna look like in your classroom, is that we have to untether public education from local property taxes. As long as our public education is tied to our local property taxes, then we are going to reproduce systematic inequalities on a permanent basis. And I know this because my mom used to drive me in her beat-up Volkswagen Beetle 45 minutes out of DC into Maryland so that I could go to public school in Maryland. Because the DC public schools were so badly underfunded, and she did that every single day so that I could get a quality education. Well, that does not have to be the case. We subsidize, we underwrite incredible amounts of spending in this state that could easily level the playing field in public education so that the funding that you get in Compton and the funding that you get in Carlsbad are the same. And that's the only way to actually have equal opportunity. I said that me and that flag got history, but I didn't say is that we have unsettled scores. Y'all promised equal opportunity. Y'all promised that we would be able to rise or fall on our merit. But what we have instead is a perpetual class system that is reproduced through education. So I'm gonna stop paying so much to cops, and I'm gonna give that money to teachers. Because in LA, just over the last 4 years, $1 billion have been paid out just for liability settlements for the LAPD. Because it is still FTP and ACAB all day, every day. And you definitely will not get that from any other governor candidate. So that's the answer. And I want to say one thing just from that invitation that you brought in, to bring it back to the mutual aid and direct action part. The biggest thing that I had to be persuaded of was why electoral interventions were the right thing in this moment. And what I realized was, because I've been doing community building stuff my whole life, but I realized that so many of the problems that we are setting out to solve through our mutual aid, our elected officials keep shoveling mountains of manure onto us so that our mutual aid is just shoveling manure off of people. What would happen if our elected officials, forget even providing benefit, imagine that they just desisted from the harm.
Just leave us alone.
Just pull the knife out. Don't even tend the wound. Then where would our mutual aid be able to go? It would be going into thriving. It would be going into education. It would be going into allowing people to meet their full potential. So if you have public education that's well-funded and teachers that are paid, I mean, LAPD is getting tanks and teachers are buying their students school supplies for them out of their own pocket. Right, so that cannot persist. And when the United States is involved in its imperialist adventurism all over the world, it always says that the best way to spend aid money in any country is on education. Because it's the thing that produces the greatest economic benefit per dollar that's spent. And the fact that they don't spend that on our communities, people that look like you and me, tells you that they do not want us to be successful. They do not want us economically flourishing, because racial capitalism needs us right where it has us. And the thing is, you put me in that governor's mansion, it'll be the first time that a person holding sitting office for an executive position in any state was not a capitalist, was not an imperialist. That's going to change a lot of things real fast. Watch. I saw a hand over here.
I was going to say, define proletariat for those who know.
Ah, okay. Yeah, defining proletariat for those that don't read Marx. I'll be honest, I only read Marx after I had first read Walter Rodney, after I had first read Frantz Fanon, after I had to read all of the third world Marxists before I made my way back to an old white man. I'm just gonna be honest with you about that. I needed like people that I believed in to vouch for any old white guy. And then I came back to Marx, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is cool, like bars. So the proletariat is just the working class. It's the people that have to sell their labor into the system because we have no capital. We come into this world without possessions. So for context on how class and race get mapped onto one another in the US. In the city of Boston, the average net worth of a black family is $8. The average net worth of a white family is $240,000. In Atlanta, it's about $8,000 for the average black family and $270,000 for the average white family. So all of those people that are coming in with nothing are by definition proletariat because they have nothing to sell, to eat, except for our labor. And so this is also a crucial part of what this campaign is about, and I didn't say it in this part, but this has to be a working class campaign. And when I gave a lecture at, it wasn't a lecture, it was a candidate forum, a debate, at the SEIU local 1000 candidate forum in Sacramento, they closed the door. This was for a union audience, largest service employee union in the state, and when they took their vote, won best candidate hands down. Best candidate hands down, and the argument was simple. I said that you cannot represent the management class and the shop floor at the same time. And who funds you runs you. If your donors are all in the corporate management class, Democrats can't be out here play acting like they represent the proletariat, the working class, when you can't represent both. That's just not the way that it works. And I said, if you want a politics for the working class rather than for the ruling class, I'm your God. And it's because my dad was a locksmith with a sixth-grade education that hustled. Yeah, it's because I know what it's like when you don't even get to the proletariat. Like, we were lumpen proletariat. Like, we were, sorry, more Marxist lingo. That's the group that's the drug dealers and the hustlers and the sex workers, the people who have no legitimate place in the system at all. And by the way, that's the other group that the Panthers brought in. The proudest endorsement that we got on the 2024 presidential campaign was when the almighty Vice Lord Nation endorsed us. That is the Midwestern equivalent of the Bloods. And when we got the endorsement of the Bloods, I turned to my wife in bed, she's Mexican-American, I said, we got the endorsement of the Vice Lords. She's like, who's that? I said, that's the Bloods in the Midwest. She's like, dope. So we're here for the, not just the proletariat, but we're here for the lumpen proletariat. We're here for my next campaign stop is meeting with all of the Pyru sets in San Diego. Because this is gonna be a block by block campaign, and y'all are gonna take this out block by block in Humboldt, county by county, town by town. I was raised in the crack era, man. Like, I think in geographic terms, and I think about corners, and we need to own every corner. So if you haven't yet volunteered for the campaign, volunteer for the campaign and start carving out your turf so you can get ready to cut it. Because that's what the Green Party, in full transparency, has never done. But when they brought me into this fight, there isn't another way to do it, so that's how we're gonna do it. And that's what this campaign has been doing since February. Yeah, I saw several hands. Yeah, go ahead.
What would you
Can I
say?
get this to you just so they hear the question too? Because I forget the question and can't repeat it right.
Top 3 ways to organize versus mobilize.
Excellent. Top 3 ways to organize instead of mobilize. So the first part of the answer is that it can come across as though I'm bad-mouthing mobilizing. And I don't want that to be the lasting impression. Mobilization is necessary. It is a constituent component of organization. And even nonviolent mobilization can be very good and very productive. Don't let anybody tell you that Martin Luther King did nonviolent protest. Martin Luther King did nonviolent direct action. Even though he wasn't great at organizing durable things, he was great at mobilizing direct actions. Direct action, the difference between that and a protest is a direct action puts the people into the gears of the machine so that the machine can't turn over, right? It stops some important part of the process of the functioning of empire or capital. And so King was very good at taking that kind of nonviolent direct action. So the first part is mobilization is necessary, but it has to be the right kind of mobilization. It has to be direct action that is designed to produce a specific outcome rather than just saying, we don't like this. Right? That's a kind of mobilization that is productive of outcomes. Whereas just when you go out for a march, and you march where the police told you to march on the day that they gave you the permits to march, that's a parade. It's not, like, imagine flying halfway across the country to go walk where the cops tell you to walk. It's wild. And that's democratic activism, by the way, low key. Like, that's 50501. You know, I hate to break it to you. Like, that's what No Kings is. That's what it is. So the first part is, I know it sounded like I was being real hard on mobilization, but mobilization is an important first step in the process of organization. So the first part is do mobilization right. Have the mobilization be designed to produce a specific outcome and to stop a specific thing from happening in the system or to facilitate a positive outcome that you're looking for. The second part, and this is the harder part, and Kwame Ture said this, he said it is easier to get the unconscious, that's how he referred to the not politically engaged. He said it's easy to get the unconscious mobilized because human beings have an innate sense of injustice that makes them want to respond to the immediate concern. So-and-so had a racist incident at their school. Let's all go down to the school and protest that principal so that some kind of action is taken. Grandma so-and-so got evicted unjustly from her place. Let's go make a manifestation to get redress for this. He said that the problem is that those are short and ephemeral, and they don't lead to the creation of structures. So the second part is that you take people who are mobilized around a specific issue, and you start to move them towards not episodic interventions, but to routinized, organized, disciplined interventions. And that almost always takes place around whatever issue they are most passionate about. if you're talking to community members who are engaged on ICE abolition, then you move from that mobilization and say, here is this tool, can we get you here next week? There is this group that is organizing not just to protest, but actually to get food and water. This is not for a protest about a bill. We're actually going and doing food distribution to the homeless. We're not just complaining about the homeless encampment sweeps, but we're trying to actually meet people's basic needs. Get them to show up on a second day and on a third day, but not just at a second mobilization. Get that mobilization to then move into organization. And then the last part, and this is the thing that I would especially suggest to those Marxists and to other leftists. Don't hit people over the head with your ideology and your theory. Honest to God, no one cares. They have as much interest in listening to you talk about Marx as you guys have to listening to me talk about Islamic legal theory.
I mean, I'm interested.
Right. There's going to be like 7 or 8 people in each crowd, right? And that's great, and we can talk about that. But it's really important, and it was actually rereading Walter Rodney's History of the Russian Revolution, and I just reread it a few months ago. That really reminded me of this really, really important piece, is that the Bolsheviks, who successfully carried out this revolution in 1917 in Russia, there's a first revolution in May, and then there's the October Revolution. The October Revolution is the one that essentially creates what becomes the Soviet Union, okay? The Bolshevik Party leads and guides that process. Do you know in May there were 8,000 Bolsheviks in the entire country of Russia? That's it. Tiny number. They did all the work in the collapse of Tsarism that happened in May, so that when the October Revolution pops off and the Tsar flees, they're now 240,000 in number, 250,000. Still a tiny fraction of the population of Russia, but they had done the work of organizing on the ground so that when Tsarism collapsed, they were the group that led the way. If you stay ready, you ain't got to get ready. Even if they cancel elections, if we are the group that did the work of organizing block by block, town by town, then when Donald Tsar Trump, because it really is just Tsarism over again. It is this bizarre cult of personality with an obviously mentally unstable and supremely unintelligent person. Like, he could not pass any class that I've ever taught at any university. So we can take it either by the ballot, or if things pop off in the streets, then we will be the group that's most prepared for that as well. And the piece that I wanted to say about this directly is that your ideology is not the thing that's going to make you the successful party or the successful movement. Socialists do not win revolutionary moments because they convince everyone in the society to read Marx and become socialists. That has never happened, not one time. Socialists win in revolutionary moments, whether electoral politics or otherwise, because they provide the best answers to people's material needs as capitalism is collapsing. So if you go to the website, and when it's not just a gathering of like-minded individuals, what I'm hammering on is universal health care. Because when Brian Thompson got de-brained in downtown Manhattan, you guys remember that? The response across the ideological spectrum was 2 tears in a bucket. You guys know what you say after that?
Yeah. And kick it over?
Nah, it rhymes with bucket. Is that a DC thing? Does that not exist on the West Coast? 2 tears in a bucket.
Yeah, no.
We know it now.
You know it now. You got read into that. Everybody's now in on that. Right? And why? Because everybody has been abused by this healthcare system. Everybody has had people people who were denied life-saving care or life-giving care just so that somebody could cash a check off of them not getting the care. And that's what neoliberalism produces. It produces a toll in front of our basic services where a corporation can take a cut off the top before we get the service, right? So we're running on universal health care, and this is a perfect example because in 2006 and 2008, the Democrats passed universal health care in the state of California, single-payer health care, where the state is the provider. They did it in 2006 and 2008 because Schwarzenegger was the governor. They knew he would veto it. So they could look like they were doing something. And then as soon as they got in power, Newsom ran on single-payer health care. As soon as he was in office, he said, who? What? So everybody in this state wants health care. Nobody wants to go broke because of a cancer diagnosis. But bankruptcy follows a cancer diagnosis within 18 months for 75% of all cancer diagnoses. We can solve that, right? So focus on the healthcare, focus on housing, focus on taxing BlackRock and Blackstone so hard on all of the vacant properties that they have in this state that they can't wait to sell them to me. That they can't wait to sell them to the state. And then we do exactly what Vienna does. Vienna has 43% of the rental properties state-owned. And this provides a natural market correction because those are run at cost rather than for profit. So combined with ordinary rent control and rent fixing, you can easily solve the crisis and you actually kill two birds with one stone. It's a little bit of a violent imagery. One of my boosters. Somebody said feed two birds with one scone. I heard that one and I was like, what's a scone? And they're like, it's kind of like a biscuit. I'm like, okay, I'm cool. So yes, feed two birds with one hand, one scone. So this particular solution also solves the problem of the escalation of home ownership prices and also the rental market issue. So focus on the way that you're going to solve people's problems. And those two things together, right? Already in the state of California, taxpayers pay 70 cents on every dollar that's spent on healthcare inside the state. And 35 cents on every healthcare dollar that's spent inside the state is spent on the insurance middleman rent-taking class. Now, I'm not a mathematician, as the saying goes. It's mathematician, I know that. My wife said, be sure you clarify. People might think that you actually think it's mathematician instead of just being a joke. But literally more than 30% is already going to this middleman class, and we're paying 70 cents on the dollar. If you take the middleman class out and the single payer is operated by the state at cost, we're already paying for universal health care. And that's what Reagan's trickle-down nonsense and the Democrat adoption of it has cost us. There is now a private profit incentive in front of every one of those things. So now imagine that you have universal single-payer health care that is comprehensive of mental health treatment and addiction treatment, and you have BlackRock and Blackstone being taxed out of the market so that you get the housing costs down. Oh snap, I just solved homelessness. 25 billion spent of y'all's tax dollars over the last 5 years on homelessness alleviation programs by Gavin Newsom's administration. And the number of people sleeping on the streets every night has gone from 120,000 average at the beginning of that period to 187,000 average now. Where did the money go? The money went into the poverty industrial complex. The money went into the NGOs that write themselves $450,000 a year salaries to operate a homelessness alleviation program. It went to developers, and when I blasted those sorry Democrats on the SEIU stage, they were all saying, we gotta build, 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 build. And I said, they're saying build, 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 but what they mean is, we're gonna write a bunch of checks with y'all monies to our developer buddies. Because they will literally do affordable housing and have 4 out of 50 units be affordable housing and get a stipend from the state. We pay for that. And then even those 4 units in 10 years will become at market rate. They're literally just taking our money and handing it to their friends. And the thing is I didn't say this in my opening spiel, but My dad struggled with homelessness for the last 20 years of his life. He was on and off the streets. Gavin Newsom was out sweeping homeless encampments, which literally means he's out stealing people's stuff. And our money that is supposed to be helping the poorest members of our society is instead padding the pockets of the wealthiest members of our society. It's criminal. And then they want to criminalize you sleeping in your car or make a carve out if you have a student ID. Did you know this? That they criminalize sleeping in your car as vagrancy. But there's so many homeless students in the CSU and the UC system that they made a carve out that you can be homeless and sleep in public if you have a student ID. Nigga, please, sorry. But, I mean, this is what they are doing. And why? Because they love y'all's money and they love spending it on not solving the problem. Because if all you have is a hammer, then every problem is a nail. If what you have is neoliberalism and handouts to your corporations, then you are going to construct a solution to every single problem that gives the handout to a corporation first. I don't take no money from corporations. Last thing I see your hand, I'm gonna call on you, I promise. But I'm in preacher mode now, so y'all just gotta let me go sometimes. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was starting his mission, they tried to buy him off. And he said, if you put the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I wouldn't desist. And that's the way that I feel about it. If they offer me the sun in my right hand and the moon in my left, I tell them to kick rocks. Because y'all don't have nothing to me that's dearer to me than liberation. Y'all don't have nothing that matters to me than being the answer to the prayer of my indigenous ancestors, of my enslaved African ancestors, of being the expiation for my European ancestors. I don't have any dreams that are dearer to me than that. So I'm not going to take y'all's money and give it to my developer buddies or to the NGO complex. I'm going to try to save people like my dad. Give them what they need. Because do you know, that 25 billion, if you took universal basic income and gave every homeless person sleeping on the streets $25,000 a year in the state of California, it would come back less than the 25 billion that we spent to have homelessness go from 120,000 to 187,000. Do you see the madness?
Yes. We see it.
So this question is kind of related to that point of criminality, the injustice system. How would you deal with the injustice system, particularly the carceral system in California? And what would your message be to brothers and sisters held in captivity at this moment?
I gotta admit, I'm just a little shocked. I was not expecting Humboldt to be this down. I mean, but it ain't, as Rakim said, it ain't where you're from, it's where you're at.
That's right.
So the first thing that I'll say in response to this question is that, and this is not campaign promotion, completely independent of the campaign. If you go to my Linktree, there's something called a Revolutionary Learning Community. So I continue to do online education courses all the time, and I just finished one for Black August. And I was reminding people that the tradition of Black August, study, fast, train, fight, was established in the California penal system, and it was to honor two fallen martyrs of the Black liberation struggle, Jonathan Jackson and George Jackson, who were both taken away by the carceral state. And it started to be observed in San Quentin in 1979 to honor their legacy. And so I do a Black study thing every year, or a Black August study thing every year to honor their sacrifices. Because liberation is always pioneered by the people that have had their freedom taken from them.
You should probably read more women authors than, because every single mention of somebody is a man, Malcolm X, Jim Baldwin, and you're talking about Black revolution.
Okay.
You're only mentioning
I meant mention family women, but I'll tell you, I will give you bell hooks. I'll give you bell hooks. And bell hooks reminded us that white supremacy isn't just a white people's problem. All right, well, I'm not going to get every voter, and that's okay. We're all dealing with various, trauma scars that we respond to in various ways, and I'm, praying for the best. Back for the question, because I'm going to address the people that are here, not people that aren't. So the first thing is I already have a list of the political prisoners that we can offer clemency to inside the state of California. Free all political prisoners. And let me be clear, and I've said this in any number of venues, I'm an abolitionist. Period, full stop. I do not believe in systems of punishment and carcerality as being the path towards public safety or anything other than more capitalist oppression. So I'm going to take every available measure to disempower the carceral state. And police unions are going to hate my black ass. And I'm okay with that. I already told you they stopped me 17 times before I turned 17. I know what this police state is designed to do. The only pictures that I have of my dad in a suit are when he is getting ready to go to court to stay out of jail for the beatings that the DC police gave him, right? So, and we know that there is no correspondence, there's zero correlation, zero, between increased spending on police and lowering crime. Those two things are not related. What happens that actually affects crime rates is meeting people's basic needs. Housing, healthcare, education, period. So we are going to invest in the root causes of crime and not in empowering Gestapo police forces to violate people's rights. And I envision a state of California where we close down Pelican Bay forever. And I have a vision of public safety that is about meeting people's basic needs and having crisis interventions, because when did a situation become better? By having a dude with a GED and a gun show up on the scene. So I guess it's all really contained in the first sentence. I'm an abolitionist, and then go from there. Was that a hand? No, just clapping. This is the part, so the DC is going to come out at me. So the club music that never made it national when hip hop was going national, it came out of DC, was called go-go music. And y'all don't know anything about go-go music, it's got more Caribbean flavor, but this is the part of the go-go around 2 a.m. where I say, are y'all tired yet? And you say, hell no. Are y'all tired yet?
Hell no.
Are y'all ready to quit?
Hell no.
All right, let's go.
So, as an abolitionist, how do you plan on shutting down our prison systems, particularly the ones where corporations tend to profit off of our prison labor? And also, how do you plan on, remedying juvenile hall treatment and how a lot of our young Black and Latino just teenagers are treated within juvenile hall? And how do we remedy that to keep them out of our prison systems instead of feeding them back in?
Thank you for the question. If I get off track and answer it, bring me back to the question, because I'm going to tell a story that I've never told in public. Some of these stories that I've told before, but I'm going to tell you about the time that I almost ended up in juvenile detention forever. And it was because I got bused out to this all-white school, 45 minutes. I was the only Black kid at the school, and they called me nigger like it was my middle name. No, they wouldn't even care. They called me like it was my first name. And I would fight every day until they stopped. And eventually, it was interesting because it was actually a Jewish kid that brought it back after a couple months. And I think it was because they had so many anti-Jewish jokes that they were hitting him with all the time, right? So that the one, marginalized community has to punch down. And he said the word after I hadn't heard it in a long time, because I couldn't stop him from saying it when I wasn't around, but I could stop him from saying it when I was. And so I grabbed him and dangled him off a third floor ledge and say it again. Say nigger one more time, and this nigga right here is gonna kill you. And he was screaming, and I got pulled back by the teacher. And the reason why I tell the story is I already had two of my closest friends that were in juvenile detention. I was 13 at that time. That would have been a homicide, and I definitely would have ended up inside alongside them. One of them, Marcus Franklin, is no longer with us. Alvin Timmerman did hard jail time and eventually joined the military. He was the smartest dude in my neighborhood. I wasn't the smartest dude in my neighborhood, not close. And we waste so much human potential inside those walls between the intersection of that nonsense education and this direct prison to school to juvie to prison pipeline. And it is incentivized by those for-profit prisons. And I cannot express enough how much of a fundamental corruption of any of our basic democratic values it is to have our carceral institutions be run on a for-profit model. We have states that have been successfully sued by private prisons for not providing enough inmates, for not meeting up to their contractual obligations. And right now, a quarter, it's not quite a quarter, the latest numbers that I've seen are 22%. 22% of the world's prison population is in the United States of America. So the concrete plan is to get the money out of the politics. The reason why those structures exist is because both of those parties are owned by corporations. And when masses say jump, they say how high. When the corporation says we want X, they say where would you like it and how, sir? So the baseline toxicity in our political culture, the baseline toxicity in our environment, the baseline toxicity in the criminal justice system, it's all from the same root. It's that our politicians serve narrow corporate interests and have absolutely no desire to do anything that is in the public interest unless accidentally it helps the public while it's on the way to getting money to their corporate donors. So the short answer to the question is it starts with the first principle, and then literally the first person that I brought onto my team is a person who's been doing carceral justice reform in New York State for a decade. Like, the way that I'm wired is that I always assume that what I don't know about a thing is more than what I even know to ask. So I never presume any solution. So like our healthcare policy, our housing policy, we didn't write any of that. We went to the people that have been doing the work on the ground, that have been at the forefront of struggling for single payer. We listened to them describe what the problems were, and then we crafted our healthcare policy around that. And likewise with the carceral state. But there's all kinds of things that you can do right away. And gang enhancements, for example. There's just a million things that you can do if you have an actual abolitionist in the governor's mansion right from jump. Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any other way to stop slavery, because that's what the prison is. That's what prison work is. It's slavery, thanks to the 13th Amendment. And the state of California voted to keep it. How else can you stop slavery in California?
Yeah, again, down AF. So the 13th Amendment, and as a historian, especially one that specializes in African history and African anti-imperialist movements, in my pre-colonial Africa survey, I actually point out that the first time that I see this happening is in South Africa in 1834 and 1835, when the British Empire abolishes slavery formally. That what the Afrikaner population does immediately is that they erect a series of vagrancy laws and start a whole new discourse on criminality. That in every single white supremacist post-emancipation society, the formerly enslaved are criminalized so that their labor can continue to be under the control of the white capitalist class. And that is exactly what the 13th Amendment enshrined, because it literally makes slavery illegal except as punishment for a crime, which means that slavery is still, in point of fact, legal. And a referendum item in the state of California endorsed and ratified that. Was it George Wallace says segregation now, segregation forever? Yeah, California said slavery now, slavery forever. Right? Now, there are some places where executive leadership has to listen to what the people say and execute what the people want, even when it's not their ideological position. But slavery ain't one of them. Slavery, I don't care how many of them vote for it. That shit's got to go. And I'll make an executive order on day one, right? That slavery is not, in point of fact, legal in the state of California.
Right.
Not even as punishment for a crime. And that stands right there on that platform next to reparations and reform and transformation of the carceral state. Because the reason why they don't want to give the reparations is the same reason why they don't want to take the slavery out of the amendment. They ain't sorry. And they want to keep it going. And the role of leadership is to lead. And the role of progressive leadership is to lead towards progress. So yeah, that's my answer to that question. The last thing I'll say, just because it leads to questions about how you govern in a viper's den, right? Because the Democrat establishment has had supermajorities in the state of California for a couple of decades now. When we walk into the governor's mansion, we're going to be walking into enemy territory. And y'all are going to be wondering, how is he going to do any of these things that he says that he's going to do? But I thought of that too, don't worry. The first part is that I was actually in Minnesota the last time an independent candidate from outside of the duopoly won an executive election. You guys remember Jesse the Body Ventura?
Yes.
Yeah. Jesse was not a Democrat, Jesse wasn't a Republican, he ran from outside of the duopoly. Jesse's actually a really interesting guy. I'm not his biggest fan, but he's a really interesting guy. And what happened in the state of Minnesota is that both from Democrats and Republicans, they all had to realign their political priorities because of the popular mandate that came with a candidate coming from out of the system entirely. You have to understand the sea change that that represents in popular opinion. So whether people like me abolishing slavery in the state of California or not, they're not gonna have a goddamn thing to say about it. And the reason is because if and when we take that power by getting to at least second place in that primary, and then me beating the brakes on the sorry little Zionist Katie Porter in every single debate that we have, that what will have happened by that point in time is that the people will have spoken. Which means that all of those legislators, Democrat, Republican, whatever, and we also have a slate of Greens that are running with me, so that we have at least a few allies in that viper's den. But the point is that those that come from either of those two corporate parties, first of all, many of them are actually about important things. They've just chosen to ally themselves with moribund and dead political parties. There are actually abolitionists that still run as Democrats. There are actual socialists that still run as Democrats. I don't understand how they do it, but they do it, right? But the point is that when we get there, The people have spoken. Either either get down with the program, either get down or lay down, because it's going down. Either get down with the program or lay down, because the people have already spoken. So, and the thing is that I'm not a politician. I've never been a politician. I've been a public servant my whole life. I'm running to try to represent you. If I get the governor's mansion and become the most hated man in the state of California, but I get you universal health care, and I get you an actual solution to the housing crisis and to homelessness and free tuition education, and I never hold public office again, all the better for me. I'm not joking. I do this because I feel like I have to. I got tagged into a fight, so I gotta keep fighting. But I'm not a career politician, I have a 10-year job. I don't need this position. But when called to serve, I'm gonna serve. So all of that is just to say, we're gonna carry out the game plan. And we are going to deliver for the people in the state of California if y'all help me build the infrastructure that's needed to actually get to that position. And again, all it's gonna take is literally like 1.5 million votes on June 2nd. Every other domino after that first one falls by itself. Because the best way that they've been able to proceed is with media blackouts and by hiding us. But like, for example, when we did the Breakfast Club, and I mean, the Breakfast Club was a great interview. Did you guys see that one, right? I got 1,000 DMs that day, 1,000, saying, I never heard of you before today, we're voting green, right? The thing is that if they can't hide this from the media, they're dead. They're finished. And they also can't use the "but Trump" argument. Because, again, they tried to rig it, but now it's just blue versus green. So where's your blue MAGA argument now? Where's your vote blue or you're going to turn it over to the Republicans argument? And the craziest part is, what y'all don't know, is that in the last 2 polls that came out before the presidential election, we were getting more voters from Team Red than we were from Team Blue. Do you know how many people in Humboldt County will vote for me that you thought were Trumpers when they see me savaging Gavin Newsom's legacy? They'll be like, he hates Gavin even more than I do. And I'm like, yeah, they ain't never been my friends. And I said this on the campaign trail to a white couple on a plane, and they were Trump voters, they ended up holding a Green Party rally in Flagstaff, Arizona. When I said, aren't you tired of the Democrats calling you racist? I said, I don't think your average Trump voter is any more racist than your average Democrat. I think that that's just a fairy tale that liberals tell themselves so that they can sleep at night. I know Trump's racist, and I said that. She's like, yeah, he is racist. He says racist stuff all the time, but that doesn't mean that the average Trump voter is more racist than the average Democratic voter. I've been knowing white liberals my whole life. What I think is that your average Trump voter, not the hard dyed-in-the-wool KKK ones, not the Charlie Kirkers, but the average Trump voter, many of your neighbors around here, do not see a difference between blue criminals and red criminals, and all other things being equal, would rather pay lower taxes. They don't want to give Gavin Newsom a bunch of money for him to hand it out to his buddies. And the Democrats try to present it as a moral failing that Republicans don't want to spend on. But the thing is if you know that the Democrats are as crooked as the Republicans, then it's not a moral failing to not want to give them any of your money. It's just common sense. Because both sides are as crooked as the day is long. Yeah.
Just on that note, I was
She
curious.
definitely don't need no mic.
On that note, I was just curious, how much of your time between now and June 2nd are you going to be in rural California, communicating with rural Californians?
So, as a team, we have separated the state into 8 districts that have the same number of voters distributed amongst them. And this room, and I mean, give yourself a round of applause just real quick. Because y'all filled this room, and I didn't know what to expect. And y'all didn't just like fill the seats with warm bodies. Like y'all filled it with some like real revolutionary energy. So my hope and my aspiration was that this would be the beginning of organizing outreach in the North, especially to those rural communities. Because I know from experience, from my conversations, their names were Jennifer Sweet and Steve Sweet. And we had this 45-minute conversation on a plane, and that flipped them. And I started using the same line that I used on them in campaign videos. And we were getting all of these Trump voters. I'm not actually just there to recruit the Bernie Trump voters. I'm gonna get Trump voters. So that means I'm not leaving any of those rural communities untended because I haven't fallen for the Democrat versus Republican fake nonsense. Like, I've never believed in it. I've never been a Democrat.
Redding needs to see you. Redding needs to see you.
Listen, y'all set up the pins, I'll knock them down. No, seriously, like you guys set this event up, and we're now having a conversation that needs to be had, right? So make those conversations happen in these other communities, and I will come through and deliver the message that is tailored to that community in the language that they need to hear it. Because that's the other part of not buying into the culture war, is that I don't care who you pray with or who you lay with. It's none of my damn business. I'm here to try to restore power back to the people, and that's a message that travels across a bunch of ideological divides. And I don't believe in throwing away white working class voters. Any more than Fred Hampton did, frankly.
Hi, my question has to do with like, what's your take on like how AI is becoming bigger? In California, especially like I'm from the Bay and Silicon Valley, it's really bad, and like 60% of the electricity use in Santa Clara, I believe, went to AI. What are you gonna do about like the environmental effects and even like the poor communities that these servers are gonna be put in?
So, again, I'm a historian and I think of things in big picture first. So if I get lost on the way back to the specific question, bring me back. But the first thing that I'll just say, so Kwame Ture is playing in my head right now. And he's saying that capitalism is a backwards system. And the reason why I'm saying that in response to this question is just very simple. Is imagine if artificial intelligence was being utilized not to maximize profit, but to maximize benefit. We would all be working 3 hours a day right now, right? And have all of our basic needs met. But capitalism organizes every tool, every technology, every innovation to maximize profit for the capitalist class rather than maximizing the benefit to society. What if drones were being used to turn deserts into fields through irrigation rather than being used to kill kids in tents? So the first part is, I'm not afraid of the tool, and I don't think that the tool itself is evil. I think that capitalism is evil, and capitalism will find an evil use for the tool. So all of the environmental consequences, that's the first part that needs to be addressed. Because without a planet to live on, where do they think they're going to spend all that money? I'm going to get philosophical for a moment on this. I saw a study that showed that the latest astrophysicists' estimations are that the water in the Earth's oceans is older than the sun. Right, kind of messes you up. And the reason is that the water was actually formed in space before the mass that became the sun and this whole solar system collapsed upon itself. Which means that the water that's flowing in our rivers, the water that's flowing in our bodies is older than the sun. We are stewards, nothing more. We're supposed to have a logic that, like our indigenous teachers, was calculating 7 generations out from now. So nothing that compromises that 7-generation strategy will ever be endorsed or supported by me, and it will always be flawed. I am not going to let corporations poison the only planet that we have. And if Elon Musk want to take himself to Mars, two tears in a bucket. Good, now we figured that one out. We're on the same page. So that's the first part, is that regulations actually produce outcomes, and that's why corporations pay so much for that kind of influence, is so that they will write the regulation schemes themselves. And I'm going to be real hard on those corporations, and I'm going to be real hard on those billionaires. 9 families in Silicon Valley control $683 billion worth of wealth. A 2% tax increase, not even a wealth tax yet, we'll get there. 2% tax increase just on their declared income would make it so that nobody in the state that makes $100K annually, and no couple, irrespective of sex or gender identity, that makes $200K would have to pay estate taxes, just with a 2% increase on those billionaires. So I'm gonna make it hard on the corporations that destroy our environment, whether it's AI or otherwise, and I'm gonna be protecting human jobs from AI. The last thing I'll say on this is that a lot of people are gonna think that this is bad for commerce in the state of California, which is decidedly not. China has the 2nd highest number of millionaires on the planet, no billionaires. And if that $683 billion that is trapped in 9 Silicon Valley households were distributed amongst X number of millionaires instead, then that's money that's circulating in the economy, and that is good for commerce all the way around. The bad parts of our economy are mainly being produced by the fact that billionaires are not being taxed enough. And a lot of our most socialist solutions to basic problems are things that are paradoxically good for commerce and bad for capitalism. I'll give you an example. Universal health care. General Motors pays more for health care than it pays for the steel in its vehicles. What's going to happen to the small business environment in the state of California when we become the first place that has universal single-payer health care? The small business versus the large corporation, the balance of power has now been redistributed, hasn't it? Because the small business owner has not been able to afford to cover their employees' health care. But now it's covered by the state. Do you see the migration of small businesses that are going to come to the state of California? It's one of the biggest reasons why U.S. manufacturers moved vehicle manufacturing to Canada after Canada got universal health care, because it kept down their costs. And when it went to one province in Canada, Saskatchewan, it ended up spreading to the whole of Canada. Get me in the governor's mansion, and we will get universal health care across this country. It's inevitable. And we will create an environment where your small business can thrive, and where regulatory mechanisms are actually enforced against those big monopoly corporations that are now buying influence. And the last thing that I'll say about the logistics of how this gets done is that inside the state of California, the governor has massive appointment power. There's a lot of things that you can do through executive authority, like declaring a public health emergency and creating single payer just as an executive act, before you even pass it. It would be just like the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln made it a proclamation, and then we got it through the process. The Democrats have faked, and they've come up 2 votes short every single time. In 2022, the last time, the insurance companies dumped $2.7 million down on the Democrats the night before the vote, and the Democrats did not bring the vote to the floor on single payer, right? So you switch that up and deliver what the people already want, and it's going to be good for business too. I love successful, thriving commerce. I hate capitalism with every core, with every fiber in my being, because we've actually reached the point in late stage capitalism where those big monopolies with state collusion essentially destroy even what made capitalism run in the first place. Everything that is not bolted down is now for sale. We've reached the strip it down and sell it for parts phase of late stage capitalism. And only an anti-capitalist is going to be able to provide solutions that actually meet people's basic needs and paradoxically allow for the success of commercial endeavors.
So, I just want to quickly say we have time for 2 more questions because I want to be respectful for the custodial staff that's going to be completing here later on. They're not here yet, but I just want to be respectful.
I appreciate that, and the thing is y'all don't really know me yet, but until they take the mic from, I'm an MC first and foremost before anything else. So until somebody takes the mic from me, I don't give it up. So I'll keep taking questions until y'all stop, unless we get directives otherwise. So thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna do my best to succinctly ask this question that is strangely feels a little self-serving, but for collective serving purposes. So with everything, I'm doing my best to, I know I'm gonna be processing a lot of everything that you've been sharing with us. And so I'm really curious to hear, like, for those of us that are kind of organizing on the front lines, because of our identities, because we're Palestinian, because we're Black, because we're trans, indigenous, like, and then the disproportionate, threat of just being kind of that front line, especially kind of in this rural area, but I'm curious about what kind of advice you might have, and I really took to heart a lot of what you said about shifting that organizing to also bring in a mobilizing piece and to have that action to be more strategic. But I'm curious about, just any advice you kind of have in that way of like, how do we kind of balance that real threat of safety that we, coming from Zionists, coming from the fucking art of Black people being lynched, like in Eureka, just discovered today, like how can we integrate all of this to escalate our actions in a way that still prioritizes safety, but is aligned with just everything we're talking about today?
Beautiful set of questions. So the first part, I just want to correct a misperception that could emerge from the way that I answered a previous question. I'm not suggesting our identities are inconsequential. Far from it. I led with the fact that I'm a practicing Muslim and that my identity politics are blacker than the Ace of Spades themselves, right? Because I believe that us showing up as who we are authentically in all of our organizing spaces is the predicate on which all liberation is rooted. Is that I have to be fully me and you have to be able to be fully you. And a trans person has to be able to show up as fully them. And that we have to have a collective politics that protects all oppressed and marginalized communities. That is not about flattening our identities. The Black Panthers were still the Black Panthers. And they were still in solidarity with the young lords and the young patriots. And we're at the foundation of the Brown Beret. So I don't want people to leave the gathering with me sounding like I'm saying that we're trying to transcend our identities. No, we're deeply rooted 10 toes down in who we are and showing up as who we are. It's just that our solidarity is where our safety is found. Our solidarity is with the brothers from the mosque walking the trans woman home so that you're not the victim of the hate crime. It's the people from the nation on the south side of Chicago. A lot of my good friends were and still are people that do community watch for people that aren't part of their communities of belonging. There's safety in numbers. and the isolated sheep is quickly culled from the herd. So our solidarity is first and foremost a survival strategy. It is understanding that we have to show up in community as ourselves and be welcomed as ourselves in those spaces without me trying to erase who you are or you trying to erase who I am. And we have to be providing for one another's mutual defense. Everybody in this room, like this gathering in this room is an incredibly powerful gathering. If we had a sign-in sheet that was creating a signal group from this gathering right here, nobody would ever have to walk into an environment where they felt unsafe on the dolo ever again. Sorry, by yourself. Ever again. That in the end, in all of our indigenous and ancestral traditions, safety was found in community. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but those are the two most important pieces that stuck out. If you want to rephrase it so I can give a better answer to the parts that I missed, I'm more than welcome to it.
I just meant to say too, that I forgot to say, is like that identity politics thing that does cause more division and does kind of then dissolve a lot of our collective efforts. So you spoke to that.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. So like, liberal identity politics are incredibly toxic. Like the most of my energy and attention in that Breakfast Club interview was talking about how disgusting it is to me that Black identity was being weaponized in service of a white supremacist genocide, right? That is a betrayal of the foundation of Blackness itself, right? So it's not that our identities are going to go away or that they're unimportant, but we need to be very careful and conscious about the way that they're being weaponized by this duopoly in order to keep us divided. But it does not mean that we leave our identities at home when we show up in the space, or we treat showing up as you as something that is negative. That's not liberation. Yeah, exactly. It's erasure, and it's voluntary bondage. The last thing that I'll just say about this, I don't know who needs to hear this, but there may be a leftist out here that needs to hear this. A lot of times that decrying of liberal identity politics is, especially when it's coming from a white person, is masking under the rubric of class struggle your unwillingness to unpack white supremacy. There is a lot of leftist bypassing around white supremacy. And if you don't believe me on this, take it from Huey Newton. Huey Newton said, I read Marx with interest, and I read Marx with interest too, but I don't agree with everything that Marx said. Like Kwame Ture pointed out, he said, when Marx and Engels said that religion is the opiate of the masses, it was only true for Europe. If you study the indigenous traditions of the rest of the world, you see the liberation potential in every last one of them. And it was because of how Christianity was incorporated into Europe within the context of empire that produced this specific outcome. He agreed with Marx by disagreeing with Marx, right? And a similar piece of this is understanding Huey P. Newton when he said, you cannot solve the problem of white supremacy just by solving the problem of capitalism, even though capitalism is the thing that leads to what we understand as racism. Capitalism produces racism, not the other way around. But if you get rid of the capitalism, you'll still have the racism. And it's the reason why Gramsci is the theorist that I love most, because he understood that intellectual traditions have their own internal cohesions and logics that aren't tethered to the superstructure. The ideological superstructure is not tethered to the material conditions in a narrow one-to-one way. Once an idea starts, it can continue. Huey Newton said it plain and simple. He said, if we solved capitalism today, racism would still exist. People would still have white supremacist ideas, people would still have racist ideas. So you cannot think that the class struggle is a magic bullet that's gonna get you from having to do the work of getting the white supremacy out of your own lives, and that brings us back to bell hooks. Bell Hooks said, white supremacy is not a white people's problem. White supremacy is threaded through all of our institutions. We all have to be pulling it out, whatever our skin color might happen to be, right?
I'll take more questions outside after we let
I just wanted to piggyback on that, or kind of continue that, that idea with, so when you, in organizing spaces, especially in areas that are predominantly white, how do you deal with, or how do you recommend others deal with that situation when leftists or liberals who are well-intending, who clearly care and want to participate, bring white supremacy into the spaces? How do you work with those people? Do you work with those people? It comes up often. So I'm really curious.
It's a great question. So, trying to decide how much information I want to divulge in the way that I give this answer. No, this is important. So I'll start with the teaching that comes from from a couple of the greats, and then I'll make a decision as to how much personal information I want to disclose by the time I get through these two citations. The first comes from Malcolm. Malcolm said, "Do not be in a hurry to condemn. There was a day that you did not know that which you know today." And having lived inside the Muslim community since I was 15 years old, 35 plus years, coming in with the zealousness of a convert and watching a bunch of toxic dynamics from people that swear they know better, always hammering down on new people, and then seeing exactly the same dynamics being produced in leftist spaces, that stuff is exhausting. It's exhausting. So you're not supposed to sit idly by while people reproduce and perpetuate a bunch of harmful actions. Nor should you be trigger happy and constantly turf defending around narrow identity questions. And that brings to the second piece. Huey P. Newton said, "I almost fell into this trap myself. I had to learn and counsel the people in the party that even when someone comes to you with a very bourgeois attitude, do not approach them with condescension. Speak to them in a way that they can understand things and explain things fully." And the thing is that it's really hard. And this is, so there's only so much that I can do even in an hour-long Q&A. But if you want to know what's like inside my head on a lot of these issues, go through the stuff in Revolutionary Learning Community. We did a whole class on Fanon and the psychology of decolonization, because it's part of a colonized psychology to produce these reflexive defenses of one's identity. It's actually a trauma scar that comes from being inside a white supremacist and imperialist environment. And the thing is hurt people, right? So, and I didn't really heal from those things until I lived in West Africa for years, literally sat with Sufi masters for years, learning the difference between the voice of my ego and the voice of justice, where I was defending my nafs, as it's called in the Islamic tradition, and where I was actually defending that which is right. And so in the end, and this is such an important point, I'm glad this went on as long as it did. There have been many successful models for these kind of anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist revolutions. I write about some of the ones that took place in Africa in the 17th century, 18th century. They had different models of political authority. and then the later ones are heavily influenced by Marxism and by socialism, and they all work. The Haitian Revolution worked, right? And Marx didn't have nothing to do with that. They all work, even though they have different models for the society that they're trying to build. And the reason why they worked is because they were all focused more on the integrity of every individual human brick in the system than in the blueprint of the edifice that they were trying to construct. I know this sounds opaque, but what difference will it make if we replace a capitalist system with a socialist system if every single person in the system is still unhealed? Do you see the problem? Is that we are actually going to bring imperialism right with us. We're going to bring the trauma right